From the creators of the hit kids podcast Who Smarted and Netflix's Brainchild comes the adventurous world of mysteries about true histories, affectionately known as math.
Every episode follows Max and Molly. I gotta say, love the name Max. That's my puppy dog's name. Who have just recruited into a secret order of problem solvers on an adventure through time packed with puzzles, hidden equations, history, and laughs. It actually makes learning pretty cool.
Yeah, now I listened to this with my son and it was so fun to listen to. I loved how modern it was with like cool aunt that they really dug and like they dealt with bullies. My son also enjoyed all the math involved. Like he thought it was really cool.
Well, and I have to say, I love anything that brings learning and fun together for kids. I really, really wish that something like this was around for my teens when they were younger. We would have absolutely devoured this on our car trips. It would have been amazing. It's perfect for kids ages 6 and up, and new episodes drop every Thursday.
So tune in to Mysteries About True Histories with your kids. You can follow and listen on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your pods.
Perfectionism is more about trying to live up to the beliefs and expectation of somebody else. Ultimately, because we're wired to connect, and as humans, we are really trying to avoid this sense of disconnection, this feeling of rejection, and this failure. Those are the ultimate roots, and that's what all this perfectionism is, a lot of avoidance of those things.
Welcome to the No Guilt Mom podcast. I am your host, Joanne Crone, joined here by the lovely Brie Tucker.
Why, hello, everybody. How are you?
Guys, we have some podcast shout outs to do today. If you don't get the No Guilt Mom Weekly yet, we have a sign up for you right in this episode. And we have a little reward program for our No Guilt Mom Weekly people. When you share it once and you bring someone else into the No Guilt Mom community, you get a shout out on the podcast. So we're going to do these shout outs. The first one is to Christina in San Antonio, Texas. Thank you for being a No Guilt Mom. And Kristen from Cannon City, Colorado, Fremont County. Two people who have shared No Guilt Mom and brought others in to just know that we're not alone and know that we have people there who will support us and help us get out of this guilt cycle.
Thank you for sharing the love and the message.
Yeah.
That is the fantastic part there. We love that so
And
much.
in line with that, today we're talking about perfectionism. So if you feel like you deal with some perfectionist tendencies, as both me and Brie, you too, right? You feel like you deal with it as well.
There's so many shoulds. And as a matter of fact, I on the outro of this episode, gonna be sharing some of my stories of where I came up with some of my perfectionism.
Yes, please. And in this episode, look forward to hearing about Bianca's Buddhist retreat where she had to be silent for 7 days, which we were like, whoa.
Which made Brie cry almost, like a fear. That I felt a chill go down my spine on that one. I'm like, I could never.
And you'll hear about why I had an immediate picture of Mandy Moore in 1999's MTV Spring Break. So we can't wait to introduce you to Bianca Hughes. She's the owner of Authentically BU Counseling and Wellness Studio, a mental health therapist, and a speaker. She actually recently spoke at both of our summits, MOMignited and the Happy Mom Summit. She guides women to let go of perfectionism and gives themselves permission to connect to their true selves and live authentically. And we hope you enjoy our interview with Bianca. You want mom life to be easier. That's our goal too. Our mission is to raise more self-sufficient and independent kids, and we're going to have fun doing it. We're going to help you delegate and step back. Each episode will tackle strategies for positive discipline, making our kids more responsible and making our lives better in the process. Welcome to the No Guilt Mom podcast. Welcome, Bianca, to the podcast. This is your first time on the podcast, even though you've been in both of our summits. So
Yes, it is. I'm super excited. This is the first time I've actually talked to the both of you together.
Yes, it is.
Oh, yeah.
So
I'm excited.
Is.
It's crazy how that can be because Joanne and I don't live far from each other. Like we originally met back in the day because our daughters went to school together and we were both doing like kindergarten art masterpiece together. And then I moved. So then I moved a whole like going from 3 minutes to your house to 20 minutes from your house. And then Joanne moved and now she lives like 7 minutes from me. So we're super close, but we don't get to do this like in-person thing. I'm actually in the upstairs of her house right now.
Yep, she's in my guest room because she has no
Oh.
internet at her house. Yes.
So the internet decided to play peekaboo for the last few days. And I'm like, no, that
a
doesn't
little
work
Easter
well.
egg for our No Guilt Mom podcast listeners, because there's another interview we just did where we talk about this too. So you can see the timeline of how we record our interviews.
Yeah, there's always something with some technological it's always something.
Always,
Right?
which really, really like is a great segue into what we're talking about with you, which is perfectionism.
Yes.
Because you can't control the things around you. You can't like control technology, of course. So like, how did you get into really focusing on helping women with perfectionism and getting over that?
The honest story.
Yes, I want to hear the honest story.
100% honest story. They're the best ones.
So when I became a therapist and I was working for about a year after I graduated, I'm like, okay, I really want to get into a niche. And I was like, I've always wanted to work with men because I've done a lot of work with women and in a lot of different ways. So I felt like for me personally, and just spiritually, like God was like, well, do, work with the perfectionism like women like you. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to look at myself in the mirror sometimes. I don't want to be reminded of where I come from. I don't want to do that. And so I had a bit of a tantrum. I'm like, no. And then I'm like, okay, well, maybe, because I realized they were the ones who I enjoyed talking to the most. I really connected. It was really easy. Mm-hmm. So after a bit of a tantrum, I like to say, I just surrendered and was like, well, who better not to help them? Why not help them if it's also something that I have dealt with? And as on my journey, I see it's still something that you have to work through. So it helped in that aspect. So
yeah, I feel like it's so hard when you go to helping people because you see it like as this altruistic thing. You're like, I want to go work in here and this just doesn't affect me whatsoever. And you think you're doing this wonderful, because I'm speaking from experience. You're thinking you're doing this wonderful thing, but then you're drawn back to your own struggles that you really have to fight through. And that's typically where you can do your best work, because I see it like on my end. I know the thought process that goes behind like anxiety and mom guilt. And I can really like know it because I experience it, and I experience it on a daily basis. And I'm guessing that you feel the same way about perfectionism.
Absolutely. When it kicks in, when it's like, all right, this is what you're dealing with at this time, and you're like, oh, why hasn't it gone nowhere? But you forget that you've learned, you can recognize it quicker. It doesn't last as long. It's not as intense. So you're like, oh, okay. After you have a little bit of a tantrum and frustration, you're like, oh, okay, I remember what to do now. So yeah.
Where has perfectionism shown up recently in your life?
Ooh, that was a good question. Ooh. Where has perfectionism shown up? Oh, okay. Well, that's easy, shall I say. In general, I just come back from a 3-month sabbatical. So, this thing of like, my word for this year is going with the flow. Well, if you go with the flow, you got to look at all the resistance. And I think the biggest place that there were so many different places I had resistance, but the one in particular I'll share is when I went to a Buddhism silent retreat, the 7 nights. So it was a lot of meditation. Yeah.
7 nights of silence.
I could not do that. I'm telling you right now. I'd be, Joanne, you know that. I'd be like 70 seconds in. I'd be like, okay, it's awkward here. Who wants to talk?
Yeah.
Go on. Sorry.
So by the time I did that, when you're doing the meditation, you're paying a lot of attention to your thoughts in your feelings. And the number one thought was control.
Really? Like how? What control was coming up?
wishing that things hadn't happened, wishing I had done something differently, trying to get a different outcome in that regard. And that was when I really noticed, oh, you like control. you know, you're attached to the outcome. And that's the other thing too with the perfectionism. That's specifically why I went to the Buddhism, to help on that piece of detachment, because there's a huge focus on attaching to the outcome, how we think it should look, realistic expectations. So I really, and you have to think this is like 8 to 9 hours of meditation, and you're realizing how much the control is there. Yep.
How much being that present with my thoughts for that long, I think would be terrifying. I mean, you read those studies about like people who their phones are taken away and they're like given the choice of whether to be bored or shock themselves, and they choose shocking themselves.
I have not read that.
Yes. They choose
Really?
shocking themselves. Like many participants do that just because it's really hard to sit with your own thoughts and process it.
Okay, what happened on that retreat if you talked? I'm curious. Did they come over and
Okay.
Who wants
tap
to know
you on the
consequences?
shoulder?
Okay. So it was like, you would go certain places to meditate, or you could meditate where you was like different rooms, and this was in Thailand. So you could have the outside in different rooms, and then you stayed with people as well in the house. And so you might say, ask me something or something like that. And I did talk to the person I saw every day. So it was like 20 minutes. But they would just tell you to be quiet if you did. I ain't gonna lie, I did talk a couple of times. However, because I had moved rooms, and the girl that I started with, we connected. So we might talk a little bit, like if you're eating lunch or something like that. However, when I did talk, or she talked to me, I actually noticed I didn't want to talk anymore.
Something inside of you was like, no,
Yeah, it wasn't
engaging in this.
No, it was no, it wasn't that I wasn't meant to be doing it. It's I didn't want to do it. Because the noise and the talking was disruptive. And once you get quiet and silent, you realize how noisy the world is. And I kind of liked it when it was getting silent, and I was getting more and more connected to myself and enjoying that piece. And so I just was like, I don't want to talk I just enjoy being with myself.
I experience that on a daily basis. I don't want people talking.
Yeah.
Except for during the podcast.
Except for during the podcast, because this is like a conversation between people, because I'm a very curious person. I think like that's sort of the misconception about being introverted or wanting to be silent, is that, oh, you don't care about people, you don't like to interact with people. And I'm like, that's not true. I am a very curious person when it comes to connecting with people, and I want to get to know people, and I love people. But also, like you said, Bianca, the noise really gets to be distracting. So much so that if I'm trying to process something, like if the noise, if my kids are right here asking me, like I become irritable because I can't follow my train of thought anymore that I'm thinking about. So yeah, I was wondering, is it kind of like that? Is that what you experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're just like, and I think also it felt so good just to be so connected to myself. And after a while, even though you have the thoughts of control and anxiety, you begin to get through to the other thoughts and like, oh, wow, I didn't know that about myself, or, oh, this feels good. And so because I'm enjoying that and it was bringing a lot of joy, it was like, yeah, I don't really want to think. I want to be more present with with myself. I just wanted to be more present.
I think that's it's a great thing to get into, especially when you're diving into the roots of perfectionism. And I want to hear all about perfectionism more right after this break. Hey, all, it is Joanne.
And Bree here.
And we want to tell you about a podcast that you should check out. It's called Understood Explains. This season of the show is hosted by teacher and special education expert Juliana Urturbe, and it's all about how to navigate individual education plans, also known as IEPs.
And in this latest season of Understood Explains, it covers topics like how to tell if your child needs an IEP, and it busts common myths about special education. We actually just listened to the episode, IEPs, Does My Child Need an IEP? And here is what we loved about it.
I loved that it was so digestible. Like it was such a short episode, and all of the topics, which could be really confusing to parents, were easily explained.
And I loved how they gave great concrete examples because you know how much I love me a good example. They explained what kind of services and supports you could actually see on a child's IEP or individual education plan. And they explained those acronyms. That nothing drives me more crazy than when there's acronyms and I don't get it. I don't know what it stands for. They took the time to explain everything in so much detail and to cover concerns that a lot of families have about special ed services.
To listen to Understood Explains, search for Understood Explains in your podcast app. That's Understood Explains, or just click on the link in our show notes.
This podcast is sponsored by Active Skin Repair, a skin health company helping people heal with natural, non toxic, medical grade ingredients.
So, Brie, I remember this one time I was in a bike race around Tucson and I wasn't paying attention. We were riding down 4th Avenue and there's railroad tracks, like streetcar tracks. And my bike's tire like went and wedged in to the railroad tracks and I totally
No.
fell down and just like skinned my hands, everything.
Ugh.
I had nothing with me, nothing at all. And it's that times where you want a first aid product and you have nothing. And Active Skin Repair utilizes a molecule called hypochlorous acid. When applied to the skin, the molecule works by mimicking the natural immune response to cleanse, soothe irritation, reduce inflammation, and support healing. I've used it on my son's mosquito bites, and I wish I would have had it the time I totally scraped up my hands.
Oh, I hear you. Like whenever I go paddleboarding, kayaking, I'm always trying to find something that is like an all-in-one that I can take with me. And Active Skin Repair could be used like that. It can be used to treat cuts, scrapes, burns, sunburns, rashes, and other types of skin damage. It's also safe and non-toxic, which makes it suitable for all skin types, all parts of the body, like eczema and acne-prone skin, all of that.
With over 500,000 happy customers, thousands of 5-star reviews, and ingredients so safe and clean they can be used from the youngest member of the family to the oldest, you now have one simple solution for all of your family's skin health needs. Visit www.activeskinrepair.com to learn more about Active Skin Repair and to get 20% off your order. Use code NOGUILT. So we're talking about this idea too. You mentioned you like control and it's like a perceived control and being attached to the outcomes. Is there
Mhm.
anything else that really drives perfectionism other than those two things?
I would say those are probably things to identify as signs,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual driving force is, so when we talk about thinking about the definition, which is evolved, I started off with this definition of it's a consistent and exhausting cycle of trying to be enough, which I still believe in. But it's also this other new definition of perfectionism is more about trying to live up to the beliefs and expectation of somebody else.
Oh, yeah.
look at Bree's face.
Yep.
Yeah. And so that's why we feel like we're not enough. That's why we're in this constant cycle, because it's not our expectations. It's not who we're meant to be. It's not what we desire. And so ultimately, because we're wired to connect, and as humans, we are really trying to avoid this sense of disconnection, this feeling of rejection, and this failure. So those are really the biggest roots, the fear of rejection and the fear of being a failure. Those are the ultimate roots. And that's what all this perfectionism is, a lot of avoidance of those things.
Yeah, and I totally agree with it. I see it every day in my life. I see it in my kids as well. And something like I've noticed is that yes, we are trying to live up to the expectations of someone else, but also like we may have totally misjudged the expectations of someone else as well.
Yeah.
And we're holding ourselves to this ideal, this kind of made up thing that no one's ever going to reach, nor does anyone expect us to reach, and yet we keep beating ourselves up about it. So like what could we do, Bianca, to get out of what I see as just this cycle?
Yeah, this like downward spiral of this should, I should, and I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I think you said it well, is so I always start with the awareness. That's where I'm always going to start with the awareness of the shoulds, the
Mm.
awareness of the feelings and the behaviors that are no longer serving us, that are keeping us in the spiral, that's keeping us stuck, that we're trying to do the same thing over and over again, and we're still not achieving this expectation or this outcome. So it doesn't even start with a fix, because also, we're not people, we're not here to be fixed, we're not a car.
Mm. Yeah.
We're
Good
not a
point.
problem. We're not a problem to be solved. How though all of my people that come in, a lot of amazing women, high achievers, doing so well. They're like, yes, I'm so used to fixing it. We're like, no. And so I think in that awareness is the first thing, because we don't pay attention to our thoughts all the time. We are such in a rush. We're not paying attention to our feelings. We don't pay attention to our body, the responses, or we tend to push them down, reject them, ignore them, cover them up with busyness, with drugs, with alcohol, with sex, whatever the case may be. But once we begin to become aware without judgment, so yeah, I am saying should a lot. Oh my God, I shouldn't be saying should. No, like I am saying should a lot. Okay,
Mhm.
just that simple awareness, just that simple acknowledgement. And everyone's like, well, I need more. No, I'm not giving you anything else because no, it's hard to do. What I just said is really hard to do. So if I sit here, I know
love that
everyone wants the next step.
your clients are like, give me more than that.
And I'm like,
No,
no.
I
Well,
said
it's
No.
funny. Bianca, to be totally honest, you say you're not to be fixed, and I hear you, and still I'm like, but we could fix this. Like, it's almost like this little voice comes from the back of my mind. It's like, no, but we can, Joanne. We can. Like,
Yes. And
it's crazy.
yeah, but then it's a paying attention to that voice. Like, well, what voice is that? Like we begin
What
to
voice is
explore that. Yeah, whose voice is that? Who is really saying that? And you can
Yeah.
begin that explanation. I know there's a lot of people, like you said, listening to me, like, no, I need more. No, this is not possible. Oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But I'm like, well, you've tried everything else and it's not working. So why not just try it? You have nothing to lose.
It's so funny because, like, I have gone into those explorations about whose voice is it, and I can't damn figure it out. Like, I can't. Like, I don't. I've asked myself because it's
Okay.
not my parents' voice because my parents never said that to me. Although maybe they did with the high achieving things, but I almost wonder, like, if it's society's voice about like how I was raised as a woman. Like, we just had this great guest on who wrote a book about teenage girls. And I connected with it so much because it talks about how teenage girls have so much power, and it's really trampled on by society because they're told to be humble and be nice and smile and make things good. And I almost wonder, like, if part of the voice comes from our social conditioning as women to like be the caretakers, don't complain, don't do anything, make things right. And there's
Mm-hmm.
good emotions and there's bad
Mm-hmm.
emotions, and you
and
should
make
have good
everybody
emotions.
happy, right? The
Yeah.
people pleaser could be part of that, I would think. Like the whole, but we can fix it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. The people pleasing is huge. And to say, yes, it could be your parents, it could be society, right? And I think one of the biggest things that gets more into us, one of the big things we don't always think about is the images. So when you
Mm.
think about the magazines, when you think about the movies, when you think about the TV shows, when you think about when you listen to songs and the picture that it, because we think in images, we don't think in
Mm.
words. So when you think about the images it plays, that's why I'm not a fan of the fairy tales, because I'm like, what is this? Like
Yeah,
this
it's
happily
true.
ever after, like what it, but they get ingrained in us, and we are taught to seek validation. This is one of the things I really discovered more about myself on this sabbatical, is that I was like, I'm great at boundaries, I can say no. What is
Mm.
this about this people pleasing? I'm so much better. But what I realized is that I had been brought up to seek validation about myself. My sense of self is am I okay, from other people
Yeah, the
and
judgment of
other.
other people.
And the other situations, and like you said, especially as a marker, as a woman, married, kids,
Mhm.
all of that done by a certain age. And if we're not living up to that, then yes. So there is
Yeah.
all this pressure also from society to have this way of living and way of being that I don't know who made it up. Like,
I don't know
I
who
don't
it
know.
was. People in control. I
But
like.
whoever made it up, they really did a great job sharing that story because we all heard it over and over.
Isn't it so? I've been watching Downton Abbey again, and like my eyes were different. I still think it's so funny, but my eyes just really honed in on the image, and when the dad was angry, when she slept with this person or that person, and you wasn't meant to, and how you had to keep up this image and presentation that we're these people. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this has been passed down for the ages,
Oh,
and no
yeah.
one's ever
Yeah.
questioned it. And so then it becomes our belief and our way of living and our decision making. And when we don't live up to that, we feel like we're inadequate and a failure.
Oh no. Like I when you said images, like the first image that came to my mind was I mean, I grew up in the 90s watching MTV Spring Break, and it's Mandy Moore with her like stick thin body smiling on MTV Spring Break outside with the sunglasses. And it comes up so readily for me as this is the ideal. And if I'm not this, then I need to work harder and I need to fix it to make sure I'm like this. So I thought that was a really interesting exercise because I wasn't expecting that to pop up, and I want to explore more about this connection between perfectionism and also people pleasing right after
Mhm.
this break.
Well, hey there, busy mama. Are you looking for ways to make your life easier, your home less chaotic, and at the same time add more joy to your life? My name is Deanna Yates, and I'm the host of Wanna Be Clutter Free, a podcast all about letting go of the stuff we don't need in our lives so that we can focus on what truly matters. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you to throw it all away or make you feel guilty about keeping something you love, no matter how many other people don't quite understand it. But I will give you practical and, more importantly, actionable advice so that you can make progress right away. And you won't just hear it from me, there are amazing guests too. It's like having your bestie in your pocket telling you it's okay to let go of the things that are not serving you and your family in a totally non judgmental way. So join me over on the podcast where we can work on progress over perfection for those of us that want to be clutter free.
If you like this show, there's a decent chance you'll also enjoy the Shameless Mom Academy. Hi, I'm Sarah Dean, the founder and host of the Shameless Mom Academy. The Shameless Mom Academy is a podcast for moms that centers moms more than it centers your kids. I'm not going to teach you how to make baby food or how to make your 3-year-old or 13-year-old stop having tantrums. Instead, I'm going to bring you back to yourself. For the last 20 years, I've been helping moms through growth and transformation. Inside the Shameless Mom Academy, I help you identify who you are and who you are becoming. Look, motherhood is hard. It brought me to my knees many times and sometimes still does. Returning to who I am and who I am becoming allows me to decide how to show up in all those sticky motherhood moments, but also in all my other relationships and in all the ways I show up in my various communities. So come check out the Shameless Mom Academy wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm willing to bet you'll leave feeling a little inspired and maybe even completely fired up. And you'll probably laugh a few times because I promise we never take ourselves too seriously over here. With 700 episodes to choose from, you're likely going to find something that sparks and speaks to you inside the Shameless Mom Academy.
So we were talking about perfectionism and especially how like we get our like ideas about what's perfect from society. And I thought it was so interesting how you mentioned Downton Abbey and this image that you had to project. Cause it's also like the same time period close by it, like Bridgerton, where they
Mhm.
always had to be accompanied by an older person so that there was no question of illicit affairs or anything like that. And it's always been protecting this image of women. And I that probably leads to this way that we become perfectionists because it's like women were always supposed to be quote unquote perfect. And if not, you wouldn't be able to get married or live because your husband was your source of income.
Right.
It's totally passed down from that. So, like, knowing these images that we see, Bianca, and knowing that we're all trying to be perfect, like, when it comes to pleasing other people, is there a connection between perfectionism and people pleasing?
Absolutely. The connection I talked about is this. First of all, it's I want to make everybody like me,
Mhm.
right? Because that's where I get my
Check.
source of value. That's where I get my source of validation. So I become agreeable. I overextend my boundaries. I have a hard time saying no, or I might go back on it because I said no, but now I feel guilty. So I feel like I've done something wrong.
Yep.
And I want this person to like me. And so I'm going to go back on the boundary. Right. And the other thing is this seeking validation and affirmation to let someone know we're okay. I'll give you a really great example. It's the first time I'm sharing this publicly.
Ooh.
Do share.
Tell us.
Yes. So I was having a conversation with someone and they asked me this question. We're talking about dating and I'm single and wanting to date and have kids and all this, and just has not happened yet. And so they asked me, when was my last serious or committed relationship? And I sat there and I thought about it. And this is an honest answer. And I said, oh, since I haven't really had one since I've been in Atlanta, and I've been in Atlanta for 18 years, and started to feel teary. So when I came off the phone, I sat there and I'm like, okay, why am I crying? What is this about? Where is this all coming from? And I know like this is different for everyone. People call it intuition, God. And I just heard this. If you were a man, would this matter?
Yep.
True.
Would it matter that you hadn't been in a committed relationship for however long? And I'm like, no.
They'd be like, you're a player, smart guy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so instantly I began to realize this belief of, if I've had this, I'm married, I have kids, this brings me this validation. This is this, right. And so we get into like relationships and things like that because we want to have this sense of validation, this sense of I'm okay, and please everyone with this image and making everybody else happy. And I sat there and I said, you know what? I'm going to own my story, because I've met people that have liked me or I haven't liked them, and maybe it's not aligned, timing, location, what the case may be. So it's not like I've not had any great experiences. This is just my story, and I'm going to own my story and walk with my story. And it may not be what the world expects, but I'm going to stop trying to, because what you do is you sometimes settle or accept things you don't really want because you're trying to please and get this image of what it really looks like, to get this sense of validation.
Yes. And
So-
like we've been taught, and it's been like ingrained in us. There's something called, have you heard of the Bechdel test? It's BECH. So the Bechdel test is this test that's given to movies, and it's to measure representation of women in film and cinema. And you pass the Bechdel test if a movie has three things. One, they have a woman as a main character. Two, the women talk about something other than a man. And I'm forgetting what three is right now, but it's basically like really easy things to pass. And only 50% of movies pass that test. Only half. And so when you look at that and how like women are portrayed in our media, I know it's
sad.
real sad. And now I'm looking for this other question, because it's like a really, really simple question, but you can go see bechdeltest.com and it'll give you like all of the movies that pass it. Okay, wait. It has to have, number one, it has to have at least two women in it who, two, talk to each other, and three, it's about something besides a man. That's how you pass it. And so when we're given this representation that our whole life is really about men, and that's all women are concerned about, perfectionism and people pleasing seem like the natural byproduct.
Yeah, exactly. To please everyone that I'm a woman. I'm like, I already know I am. Like, what do you want me to prove?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. By the way, Dune Part 2 passes the Bechdel test.
But not part one? Not part one? Or does part
I don't
one
know.
pass
Well,
it?
it has some, I could tell you the ones that don't pass. Uncut Gems doesn't pass it.
I haven't
Back
seen
to the
that yet.
Future does not pass it.
Mm-hmm.
Barbie, of course, passes it. Let's see. The other ones, recent, Error does not pass it. That Matt Damon, Ben Affleck movie. I'm looking for other ones like I recognize. Oppenheimer doesn't pass it.
I guess
Super
not.
Mario Brothers movie doesn't pass it. Something that we're showing to kids. So yeah. Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? Like,
Yeah. And that's what we develop because that's what we're shown. And so that's a lot of the work that I'm doing is dismantling those beliefs and those images and being like, well, what's really true for you to help people align with their truth and their authentic self versus everything that we have believed and we make the decisions about and what and how it makes us view and feel about ourselves. So once you change the belief that now my belief is, well, that's not where my value is to be in a committed relationship. Like that's no. Once you uproot that, you're like, oh my God, I feel so free. What am I going to do next?
But you're able to shed the shoulds.
Yes, exactly. It has been fascinating as always talking with you. You bring such great insight to our conversations, and I always have so much fun. The time passes like that. What right now is coming up for you that you're excited about?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm just continuing to be excited about the flow. Like I said, I've just been on a 3-month sabbatical and I've only been, like, as I'm talking to you today, I've been back 2 weeks. So I'm just excited to see how that continues, where I'll be next.
I would think that'd be a big readjustment coming back from that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think so too.
We're so glad you're here.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you so much
for having me.
Yeah. And we will talk to you soon.
So, okay. So on this episode, we talked with Bianca about how there's all these messages that we hear that are given to us about how we need to be perfect and people pleasing and all that. And all I got to say is, as much as I loved growing up in the 80s and I loved my John Hughes films, John Hughes ruined my life. That man made me think that you could change any things are going to just magically fall into place. You can make everybody happy in an hour and a half.
The guy would fall for you for being your quirky little self.
Yeah, you could take the person that is hurt and damaged and you could just love them and mold them enough into things that will make it better. And also that like your worth is tied into what those other people do think of you. Because even though I don't know, I hope that like Breakfast Club people don't come back to get me, but it teaches you that it is so important what other people think of you. And that you've got to check off those boxes.
And how many women wanted to reform a bad boy? Like, they're like, oh, he's bad now, but I can change him.
Yeah. He may have like devil tattoos all over his body, but I can make it work.
You know what today's generation does? Like teenagers, they're like, red flag. That's a red flag.
I know, right? Thank God they're so healthy now. Like, I do feel like that is one thing, that trauma that our generation went through of being told that we had to be quiet and put together and please everybody. Again, as women, our role was to make everybody happy. The glue that holds everything together, that's what we were. And that we had certain things that we had to check off on the list of, like Bianca talked about in the episode, being married, having kids. If you don't check those boxes, then there's something wrong with you. Thank God that the generation of kids that we are bringing up are like, no, that's not my story. I don't know where you're coming from on that. Red flag right there.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we still see that appear for us today in like social media, just for our generation and age group in particular. And we're talking about like millennials and Gen Xers, where you see this fight back against like women portraying themselves in a non like feminine way. So for example, gonna get into politics here as truly a like outside look at it. But there's a lot of talk recently about Kristi Noem. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right. She's the governor of, I think, South Carolina. Like, if you want to hit me on something, hit me on my facts on that, because that might not be correct. But like, she went through a pretty drastic physical transformation recently, where before she had like really short hair, not much makeup, basically our interpretation of what like being intelligent and being a woman leader was. We can't look a certain way else people won't take us seriously kind of thing. She has transformed into long hair extensions, curly, lots of makeup on her face. Like when you look at pictures, it looks completely like different. Like, I mean, if you're pulling them up right now,
I'm
like,
going to, because I don't know
it's
this.
a complete transformation. I didn't know it either. And apparently she recently came into, and this is actually airing a month later then they were recording, so it may not even be an issue anymore. But she did this like Instagram kind of reel advertising a person who fixed her teeth out of state. And her state was all up in arms because she went to Texas and she's from South Carolina. And they're like, why didn't you go to a doctor in South Carolina to fix your teeth? Like, all these things.
Interesting.
But the idea is, at least the opinion piece I was writing, is she is in the running to be Trump's running mate. And so she turned herself into a woman who is typically in that orbit and that picture of femininity that is typically shown in that orbit.
Oh, I'm
so-
looking this up online and I'm seeing it now.
Yeah.
I'm
Isn't it
seeing
interesting? It's so fascinating because we're getting hit with this messaging today. And especially now in this political race, like that to be a woman, you need to show that you are feminine, that you have makeup, that you're non-threatening to the men around you. So it's interesting. I will
South
leave it
Dakota.
there.
She's South Dakota.
South Dakota. South
There we go.
Dakota. I will
But
not
yeah.
say same thing. I will not say same thing. I will keep my Arizona elitism right here. South Dakota is different than South Carolina. Yes. South Dakota.
It was still a South. There aren't too
There's
many
a-
of them. So,
Allow that for my own ignorance. Yes. South Dakota.
but yeah, that is so, so true. Like that it is all about, it definitely feels like she is trying to conform to something for sure there. So
There's a strategy there. It's a strategy, I am sure. It is well thought out. It's a well thought out political
I
strategy.
feel icky about that.
I
feel so
know.
icky about that.
I know.
Ugh.
Yeah, I feel icky about it as well. And you see all these pictures of what you should be as a woman. And that right there is a really great example of what they're going for.
You know, tying it back to Bianca made a really good statement. We are not a car to be fixed.
No.
Right? So going through and changing yourself just to get and that's the thing. There would be no problem if you're going through and you're changing yourself because you're thinking about it and you're like, this is not my authentic self. A way that I visually have done that, and you'll shake your head. Yep, totally. Like for me, I have always wanted to have colored hair, like brightly colored hair. And anytime that I don't, I'm not being my true self because I'm like, that's me. I've always wanted to do that, but I never did because I felt like it was unprofessional. People would think that I was cuckoo crazy Cocoa Puffs and that I didn't know what I was talking about because who has pink hair? And once I started I didn't do that until I got divorced. And I did go a little crazy. Like I even remember going into like divorce court and my divorce attorney could be going like, really? Teal hair? That's how we're playing it today? And I'm all like, what?
What's wrong with it? Yeah.
With this? But like doing it for yourself and being true to yourself, going through a transformation like that, all for that. But when you're
Yeah.
doing it because you're clearly trying to get the approval of somebody else, especially when it's somebody else and not
Yeah.
like,
But I won't criticize
Bigger.
Kristi Noem for this. I criticize really the society that we're in for this. Like,
yeah.
she wouldn't even have to do this if she's totally right. She's actually right. If she wants this, that's what she has to do. She is right.
That's
but it
the
sucks.
messed up part. That is
Yes.
the up part that you
Yep.
have to go through and make that kind of a change to fit into the mold that somebody wants you in. So
Exactly.
we're here to tell you that perfectionism, that voice in your head that's telling you that you can fix it and that you should fix it and that you should be doing this and you should be doing that and that you're letting people down because you're not meeting that expectation. That voice is bullcrap.
It is. And it's better just to bring it from the subconscious into the conscious so we know exactly what we're dealing with in that situation. So until next time, share this episode with whoever you feel needs it, who is struggling with perfectionism. Give them a little light at the end of the perfectionist tunnel. And until next time, remember, best mom's a happy mom. Take care of you. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks for stopping by.
When it comes to raising kids, there's so much to consider. Things like, what do we feed them? When do we feed them? How do they sleep? What does it look like to raise kind kids? How does their nervous system work? How do I keep myself calm? What are my triggers? There's so much that comes into play, and we are distilling all of that information for you at Voices of Your Village podcast, where we bring experts in the field of early childhood and education and psychology and across the board so that you don't have to comb the internet for information. You get to show up and hang out and have shame-free, judgment-free conversations and insights into what it looks like to raise kind, empathetic, emotionally intelligent humans. I'm Alyssa Blask Campbell. I have a master's degree in early childhood education. I'm a mom of 2, and I am walking this journey right alongside you doing this work. Come hang out with me at Voices of Your Village, and we can dive into real conversations with actionable tips.